Another important dimension of the problem is conflicts, and here again, without really giving justice to the richness of the underlying data, but looking at some of the data sets that have been built over the last few years, this particularly one is the one from the University of Uppsala. What is interesting is that for a number of countries, the one in the yellow on the top, the share of conflict-related fatalities, as related to the share of population in drylands, tends to be higher for a number of countries. I mean, you see Kenya and Ethiopia. So in other words, for some of these countries, essentially the likelihood of being affected by conflict episode, in this case, which might turn to be fatal, is actually higher if you live in some of these dryland countries. It's not a clear-cut picture because there are a number of kind of important countries. Nigeria, for instance, is one. Although probably the picture is the figures are going to change now with all the Boko Haram kind of episodes. But at least for the data already on record, this will suggest that this kind of correlation between conflict and drylands is not kind of a universal one. Now we try to really kind of articulate this vision, really looking at the future, right? And this is kind of the part of the work that is really kind of absorbing a fair amount of our energies. And here what we're trying to do is to really look at the extent to which our three determinants of vulnerability might be changing over time as a result of three main drivers. Population growth, which as you would expect is a very important one. Climate change, which might put additional pressure on the natural resource base of these areas. But also economic transformation. And here the idea, and I'll show you some figures here, the idea is that as some of these countries transform over time and kind of see diversification of sources of economic growth, there might be an opportunity for actually decreasing some of the, what I called earlier, the sensitivity related to kind of agricultural dependent livelihoods. And of course, these two factors, the population growth and economic transformation, play in the opposite direction. So I think part of the work is trying to look at what is the net effect of these two forces. So just in terms of the overall kind of snapshots, just looking at UN median population projection, and here putting all the drylands in one basket, clearly we're going to refine the analysis further, as I'll show in a minute. By 2030, the next 20 years, the next 15 years in fact, there's going to be in excess of 200 million people more living in drylands, with increments stronger or weaker depending on the areas that we're looking at. But clearly there is a lot of kind of important question needs to be asked as to the ability of this socioeconomic system to support this population. But of course, this is a figure taken from the 2008 World Development Report that the World Bank used. The empirical observation is that as countries grow in terms of GDP per capita, the share of agriculture into total labor tend to increase. Of course, it's a broad regularity. Not all countries conform precisely to this one. But clearly the idea is that as countries grow, the role of agriculture tends to decrease, both in terms of contribution to the GDP and also contribution to employment. So to which extent growth might actually relieve some of the pressure from this area. So that's one question we're trying to investigate. And finally, climate change has been the subject of a lot of attention over the last few years, particularly as prediction for kind of a more rapid warming might actually increase. So climate change, something has received quite a bit of attention. There are new reports pointing to the likelihood of a 4 degrees increase in global mean temperature, as opposed to 2 degrees that is being discussed so far. And what are the implications for drylands? So we started looking at kind of the first aspects of it, which how big will drylands be in climate change? And so this maps gives you a sense of the possible change in the extent of drylands under particularly severe kind of drying scenarios by mid-century. And in this case, just the size of drylands might increase all the way up to 20%. So there will be more land and more people subject to kind of a more challenging kind of climatic conditions in the future, and therefore kind of additional challenges to be addressed. There's another important dimension, which is not only the kind of the size of the landmass in dry condition, but also the extent to which the drought episodes, for instance, might become more frequent and more severe. And we hope to be able to also say something about that. So looking forward, so how many people will be vulnerable in the next 15 years, right? So I think that's a very important question that will affect, for instance, the size of our investment, the size of our the social protection system in the countries, the size of humanitarian aid when everything else fails. So I think that's an important question that we feel it's important to kind of put squarely into the debates, and it's not an easy one to answer. So we're basically developing a framework and some data. I'll show some preliminary findings that help illuminate that question. And clearly, there has to be, as in all this modeling exercise, you need to come up with a simplified metric and a few simplified assumptions. So we're basically looking at, in terms of exposure, just the people living in dryland areas, a first approximation, and the second one in drought-prone areas. In terms of sensitivity, a proxy will be the number of people employed in agriculture, but also trying to kind of differentiate among different livelihood strategies because they all have different vulnerability profiles. And in terms of ability to cope, the proxy that we are thinking of using is just the people below the poverty line, because presumably this will be a good indicator of their ability to respond to shocks. So the first result, and we don't have time to get into the details, but essentially, combining the UN population projection with some estimate of the relationship that I showed you before between GDP growth, growth in GDP per capita and employment and agriculture. Essentially, we come up with these kind of figures that suggest that, focusing on Eastern and Western Africa alone, there might be anywhere, something in the range of 70 million people, additional people living in drylands, with a breakdown in terms of the three livelihood strategies organized like this. So, for instance, there's going to be something like 10 million people in pastoral areas. And if you think about the current source of stress, both in terms of natural resources and conflict that this livelihood already experienced, 10 million more people, it's going to be like a big problem to face in the future. Now, an important observation is that this clearly depends on what we assume in terms of GDP growth. And in the previous slides, I basically used the essentially an average of the country-by-country performance over the last 20 years or so in terms of growth. But clearly, growth has been variable in some countries more, some countries less. And so when we are more optimistic about growth patterns, so we considering that the countries will perform according to the top 10% of the years in which they've been growing fast, essentially you get 10 million people less in relying on agriculture in dryland areas in East and Western Africa. If countries grow slow, so according to the bottom 10% of the years, you're going to get something in the range of 10 to 12 million more people. So an important message here is already that the overall grow faster than the historical average. What also we're trying to do is to tackle perhaps one of the toughest challenge of all, which is to explore the let's say the possible future of the livestock-based pastoral as well as mixed livelihood system combining both livestock and farming. So this is like a proxy. And what this does, it tells you what is the likelihood that the animals living in these areas might need to move, and therefore perhaps engender all these conflict issues that are associated to that. And so basically 20 or 40% for instance of this area of the animals don't have enough resources to support themselves. Clearly, so the historical pressure is higher in this area, less or so in the lighter yellow and so on. And what we then do is to Okay, what we then do is to kind of look at possible future and saying, well, you know, it is conceivable that, you know, out of the many possible future, we might get a future with more droughts than in the historical past. And so combining the two factors, the increase in the herd numbers that, you know, we've experienced, we've seen occurring over the last, you know, 20 or 30 years, with the possibility that there will be more droughts than we've experienced kind of historically, we find that, you know, compared to so if you make it equal to 100, the animals that were not able to support themselves, this index of pressure will actually increase in the red areas, okay? And all the way to 80% in some cases. Now that's an important message in terms of the likelihood that this need for further movement will result in further exacerbation of conflicts, okay? So, and also the fact that, you know, it's not reported here, but typically the amount of TLUs, so tropical livestock units, per household or per capita, tend to be largely insufficient for supporting the livelihoods of this population. So you basically, you don't have enough animals to support them, and for those animals that you have, you need to move a lot more. You will need to move a lot more once herd grow and if you get exposed to more drought shocks. And I think Mohammed will also tell you what some of the responses might be in terms of alternative interventions to address these issues. So I have one final slide before handing over to Mohammed. And so the rationale here, as you can see, there is still kind of you know, taking shape, this overall framework for kind of understanding how the future might look like. What we intend to do is to basically use it as a kind of an entry point for assessing, in some cases in more quantitative detail, in some cases less, but assessing the ability of different policies to kind of respond to this growing pressure coming from population and take into account you know, structural transformation of the economy. So we're looking at issues such as irrigation development, to which extent you know, the ability to kind of promote irrigation in some of these areas might offer alternatives. You know, development of alternative kind of livestock support strategies, integration of the current livelihoods, pastoral and non-pastoral, into the broader market economies, and so on. There might be limits to the extent to which these interventions might be able to reduce sensitivity. And so the question is, you know, when you still have a lot of people that are not only sensitive but also unlikely to be able to cope, you know, what is the other burden that will result from in terms of humanitarian aid or social protection system? So we're also hopefully going to be able to quantify some of that. This hopefully will provide some kind of evidence-based support for kind of articulating an overall kind of let's say set of policy messages for responding to these challenges in the next 15 years. I'll stop here and hand over to Mohammed, and then I'm going to walk right back.